This is Audible.
Simon & Schuster Audio presents Beautiful Stranger by Christina Lauren. Read by Jonathan Cole and Grace Grant.
Prologue. When my old life died, it didn't go quietly. It detonated. But to be fair, I'd been the one to pull the pin. In just 1 week, I rented out my house, sold my car, and left my philandering boyfriend. And though I'd promised my overprotective parents that I'd be careful, it wasn't until I was actually at the airport that I called ahead to let I heard her small, sharp inhale. "You okay?" "Better than okay." And I was. I don't think I realized exactly how okay I was until that moment. "I think it's the best decision you ever made," she told me, and then paused, listening as Bennett spoke in the background. "Bennett says you're going to shoot across the country like a comet." I bit my lip, holding back a grin. "Not too far off, actually. I'm at the airport." Chloe screeched some unintelligible sounds and then promised to pick me up at LaGuardia. I smiled, hung up, and handed the counter attendant my ticket, thinking a comet was too directed, too driven. I was really more like an old star, out of fuel, my own gravity pulling me inward, crushing me. I ran out of energy for my too perfect life, my too predictable job, my loveless relationship, exhausted at only to evaporate until we were just 3 young friends in a limo, barreling down the street to celebrate a new life. And this night, we weren't just celebrating my arrival. Chloe Mills was getting hitched, Julia was visiting, and the newly single Sarah had some living to do. The club was dark, deafening, and filled with writhing bodies. On the dance floor, in the halls, against the bar, a DJ spun music from a small stage, and flyers plastered all across the front promised that she was the newest and hottest DJ Chelsea had to offer. Julia and Chloe seemed entirely in their element. I felt like I'd spent most of my childhood and adult life so far at quiet, formal events. Here it was, as if I'd stepped out of the pages of my quiet Chicago story and into the quintessential New York tale instead. It was perfect. I shoved my way up to the bar, cheeks flushed, hair damp, and legs feeling like they hadn't been properly used like this in years. "Excuse me," I shouted, trying to get the bartender's attention. Though I had no idea what any of it actually meant, I'd already ordered slippery nipples, cement mixers, and purple Hooters. At this point, with the club at maximum density and the music so loud it shook my bones, he wouldn't even look up at me. Admittedly, he was slammed, and making such a small number of tedious shots was annoying. But I had an intoxicated, newly affianced friend burning a hole in the dance floor, and said girlfriend wanted more shots. "Hey!" I called, slapping the bar. "Sure is doing his best to ignore you, isn't he?" I blinked up, and up, at the man pressed close to me at the crowded bar. He was roughly the size of a redwood, and nodded toward the bartender to indicate his meaning. "You never yell at a bartender, Petal, especially not with what you're going to order. Pete hates—" "No! There is no way I'm leaving this club with you." He bent and pressed a small, careful kiss to my shoulder before telling me, "But I want to touch you." I couldn't pretend that I didn't want it, too. It was dark, with flashing, arrhythmic lights and music so loud it felt like it hijacked my pulse. What harm could come from one wild night? After all, Andy had so many. I led him past the restrooms, farther down the narrow hallway to a tiny abandoned alcove overlooking the DJ station. We were trapped at a dead end, secluded around a corner, but by no means hidden. Other than the wall forming the back of the club, the rest of the space around us was open, and only a waist-high glass wall kept us from falling to the dance floor below. Okay. Touch me over here. He raised an eyebrow, ran a long finger across my collarbone from one shoulder to the other. What exactly are you offering? I met those strangely backlit eyes that seemed so amused by everything around him. He looked normal, so sane for someone who followed me through a club and bluntly told me he wanted to touch me. I remembered Andy, and how rarely, outside of keeping up appearances, he ever wanted my touch, my conversation, my anything. Is this how it happened for him? A woman would pull him aside, offer herself, and he would take whatever he could before coming home to me? Meanwhile, my life had become so small I could hardly remember how I used to fill the long nights alone. Was it greedy to want it all? A career to die for and a crazy moment here and there? You're not a psychopath, are you? Laughing, he bent to kiss my cheek. You're making me feel a touch crazy, but no. His fingertips teased at the back edge of my dress, and then he lifted it, slid a hand down the back of my underwear, over my backside and between my legs to where I positively ached for him. Even the vulnerable position didn't embarrass me as I arched back into his hand, already lost. You're drenched, sweetheart. What's it you like? The idea that we're doing this here? Or that I watched you think about fucking me while you danced? I didn't say anything, too afraid of what the answer might be. But I gasped when he slid a long finger inside me. Thoughts of what I should do blurred along the edges as I thought about boring Sarah in Chicago. Predictable Sarah who always did what everyone expected of her. I didn't want to be that person anymore. I wanted to be reckless and wild and young. I wanted to live for myself for the first time in my life. The best decision I'd ever made. Dear New York, you are brilliant. Love, Sarah. P.S. This is definitely not the alcohol talking. I don't have many chances to look at the back of my neck. A shame, really. He pulled his hand away, and I felt a mild chill where his warm fingers had been. He dug into his pocket and pulled out a tiny package. A condom. He just happened to have a condom in his pocket. It would never have occurred to me to bring a condom with me to some random club. Turning me to face him, he swiveled us, pressed me back against the wall and bent to kiss me. First soft, and then harder, hungrier. When I thought I'd lose my breath, he wandered away, sucking at my jaw, my ear, my neck, where my pulse hammered wildly. My dress had fallen back down my thighs, but his fingers teased at the edge, slowly lifting. And then his words fell away because he was deep inside me. Here in this chaotic club with living, breathing lights and music pulsing all around us, where people walked past unaware only 15 feet away. And yet, my entire world reduced to the place where he filled me, where he rubbed firmly against my clit with every stroke, where the warm skin of his hips pressed to my thighs. There wasn't any more talking, only small thrusts that grew faster and harder. The space between us filled instead with quiet sounds of praise and urging. His teeth pressed into my neck, and I gripped his shoulders for fear I might fall over the edge, or even somewhere else, not onto a dance floor, but into a world where I couldn't get enough of being so exposed, having my pleasure so visible to anyone watching, especially this man. Christ, you're gorgeous. He leaned back, looking down, and sped up a little. I can't stop looking at your perfect skin, and fuck, where I'm moving in you. Light was clearly on his side, because to me he was backlit, just the silhouette of my stranger. I could see nothing when I looked down but dark shadows and the suggestion of movement. Him into me and out again, slick and hard, pressing against me with every pass. And, as if to emphasize that I didn't really need to see anyway, the lights dimmed almost to black as a lazy, oscillating beat filled the club. "I took video of you dancing," he whispered. It was a few long moments before his words registered above the feeling of him moving in me. What? "I don't know why. I won't show it round. I just—" He watched my face, slowing down enough, presumably so I could think. "You were so fucking possessed. I wanted to remember. Bloody hell, I feel like I'm confessing my sins." I swallowed and he bent closer, kissing me before I asked, "Is it weird that I like that you did that?" He laughed into my mouth, moving in and out of me again with slow, deliberate strokes. "Just enjoy it, right? I like to watch you. You were performing for me. There isn't anything wrong with it." He lifted my other leg, wrapping both around his waist, and then, for the span of several perfect seconds in the darkness, he started to really move. Fast and urgent, he let out the most delicious grunts, and there would be no question what was happening if someone happened upon our little corner of this balcony. With that thought alone, where we were, what we were doing, and the possibility that someone could see this man taking me so roughly, I was lost. My head rolled back against the wall, and I could feel it. Feel it. Feel it. Building in my belly so low and heavy, an aching ball.
Video of a girl dancing just before you fucked her against a wall. Whatever you're looking at on that phone is obviously 100 times better than how the Jets are gonna look this year, and you're not sharing. If only he knew. "Taking a peek at the market," I said, with a small shake of my head. I almost whimpered as I closed the video, slipping my phone into the inside pocket of my suit jacket. Boring stuff. Will drained the last of his drink and laughed. "I hate that you're such a good liar. If we hadn't been best mates since opening one of the most successful venture capital firms in the city 3 years ago, I might have actually believed him." "I think you're looking at porn on your phone." I ignored him. "Hey, Max." James Marshall, our head tech advisor, piped in. "Whatever happened with that woman you were talking to at the bar?" Normally, when my best mates asked about a random woman I'd met, I'd shrug and say, "Quick shag," or even simply, "limo." But for so asked. "Yeah, we went to uni together. He was my flatmate for 3 years. Called a couple of months ago, wanted to borrow my place in Marseille to propose to his girlfriend. We talked about Ryan Media's expansion to the New York office." We watched as Bennett stopped at a table on the far side of the room, smiling like an idiot before bending to kiss a stunning brunette. I'm guessing France did the trick. Will laughed. But it wasn't the future Mrs. Bennett Ryan who had my attention. It was the beautiful woman who stood beside her, reaching for her purse. Caramel honey hair, the same red lips I'd been kissing at the club, the same wide brown eyes. It was all I could do to stay in my chair and not go straight to her. She smiled at Bennett, and then he said something that made both women laugh as the three of them left the restaurant, and I could do nothing but stare on. I supposed it was time to pay my old friend a visit. Max Stella. Large metal doors separating an inner office from Ryan Media's outer reception area opened, and the man himself walked out to meet me. "How the hell are you?" I stepped away from the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Fifth Avenue and shook Bennett's hand. "Brilliant," I said, glancing around. The space itself was at least 2 stories high in the atrium, and the polished marble flooring gleamed in the full sun. A small seating area was set off to the side, with leather couches and an enormous glass bubble chandelier hanging from at least 20 feet up. Behind the broad reception desk, a smooth waterfall was built into the wall, the water cascading over slate blue stone, A small cluster of employees hurried from the elevators to various offices, throwing Bennett nervous glances. "Looks like you're settling right in." He motioned for me to follow him inside. "We're slowly getting things rolling. New York is, after all, still New York." He led me into his office, a corner suite with seamless windows and a breathtaking view of the park. "And the fiancée?" I asked, nodding to a framed photograph on his desk. "I'm guessing she liked the Mediterranean. Why else would she agree to marry an arrogant twat like you?" Bennett laughed. "Chloe is perfect. Thanks for letting me take her there." I shrugged. "Just an empty house most of the time. I'm glad it did the trick." Gesturing for me to sit, Bennett sat himself in a large wingback chair, his back to a wall of windows. "It's been a while. How are things?" "Fantastic." "So I hear." He scratched his jaw, studying me. "I'd love for you to come over sometime now that we're moved in. I've told Chloe all about you." I hope that's a slight exaggeration. Of anyone in New York, Bennett Ryan probably had the most dirt from my wildest days. "Well," he conceded, "I've told her just enough to want to meet you." "I'd love to catch up any time." I glanced at the buildings out the window behind him, hesitating. She narrowed her eyes. "I should have guessed you're a psychopath." I laughed. "Not quite." A young woman walked by, ducking her head and muttering a timid, "Good afternoon, Miss Dillon," before scampering away. "And we have a last name. Thank you, terrified intern." "Ah, Sarah Dillon," I crowed. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation in a more private location?" She looked around and dropped her voice. "I'm not having sex with you in my office, if that's what you're here for." Oh, she was fantastic. "Actually just came by to welcome you properly to New York, but I suppose I could just do that out here." "You have 2 minutes," she said, turning on her heel and moving toward her office. We turned corner after corner, finally reaching another smaller reception area lined in windows overlooking the city skyline. A young man sitting at a circular desk looked up at us as we passed. "I'll be in my office, George," she said over her shoulder. "No interruptions, please."
Confusing. Max. Sarah. I hesitated for a long beat before I slid into the booth beside him and felt the radiating warmth of his long, solid frame next to me. "You look beautiful," he said. I looked down at the simple black dress I wore. My bare legs peeked out below the hem and just above the knees. He ran a finger from my shoulder to my wrist, and my bare skin broke out in goose flesh. "I won't come to your office again like that," he said, so quietly I had to lean a little closer to hear him. "But I do want to see you again." I shook my head, staring at his long fingers on me. "I don't think that would be a good idea." When the waiter stopped at our table, Max's fingers lingered on my hand, and when I was unable to think of anything to order, he chose meals for both of us. "I hope you like prawns," he said, grinning. "I do." He licked his lips, watching me. "Your tongue tastes like candy, but your pussy tastes even better." He leaned in and kissed me deeply. "I want it to be my cock inside you next time." "Yes, please." Jesus, who was this woman possessing my brain? Because I wanted it too. Even after what he'd just given me, I wanted to climb into his lap and take all of him inside. Before that line of thinking could get me into even more trouble, my phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out. Bennett. "Back from my meeting. Let's sit down at 2. The clock on my phone read 1:45. "I have to go." "We're establishing a pattern here, Sarah. You come, you go." I offered him a half-smile, half-wince, but when the waiter came back with our food, I slid.
Bennett laughed, bringing his glass to his lips. He didn't comment, but it was impossible to miss the way his eyes shifted over my shoulder. I turned just in time to see Chloe and Sarah walking back from the restroom. Sarah looked stunning, in a light green gown with beading covering the bodice and trickling into the skirt. Silver stilettos peeked out from beneath the hem of her dress. It took a moment before I could speak. "She's here with someone, Max." I turned and gaped at Bennett before looking around our immediate vicinity to try to spot who she might have come with. "She is? Who?" "Me." "Wait, what? No way." "Christ, I'm kidding. Look at your face." He scratched his jaw and waved casually at someone across the room, and I legitimately wanted to punch him. "Max," he said, voice low and serious now. "Sarah is Chloe's best friend, and an important member of my team. I trust your business sense more than passion." She returned a polite smile. "A quick Google search gives a girl plenty of information." "Hasn't anyone ever told you the internet is full of rumor and falsehood?" I stepped closer, brushing the backs of my fingers along her arm. It was soft and smooth, and I noted the way goosebumps spread along her skin. "You look stunning tonight, by the way." She met my eyes, sizing me up. Even as she put a little distance between us, she murmured, "You don't look so bad yourself." I feigned shock. "Did you just compliment me?" "I may have." "It would be a shame for both of us to have gotten all dressed up and not share a dance. Wouldn't you agree?" Sarah glanced around the garden, and I added, "Just a dance, Petal." She emptied her glass and set it on the tray of a passing waiter. "Just a dance." Placing my hand on the small of her back, I guided her to a dimly lit corner of the dance floor.
My hand in the air. "The thing on Friday." "He's gorgeous," she said. Poke, poke. I could feel her gaze on me. Chloe was the least subtle poker in the world. She dropped a hint like a strike fighter drops bombs. "Don't you think he's gorgeous?" Finally, I looked up at her and rolled my eyes. "Knock it off. I'm not going to swoon for you over Max Stella. He seemed nice, that's all." She laughed and shoved a few books on the shelf. "Fine. Just making sure you weren't caught under his spell. He sounds like a great guy, but yeah, definitely a player. At least he's upfront about it, though." She watched me for a minute as I struggled to not react to that. It was a fair dig on Andy, and was the kind of thing she could say in a year or two, and we'd both laugh and say, "I know, right?" But for now, her words just kind of dissolved into awkward silence. "Sorry," she mumbled. "Bad timing. In the 3 years you and I have known each other, I only had dinner with you guys maybe 5 times. I learned more about him from the papers than I did from any stories you told me. You hardly ever talked about him. I always just ended up with the sense that he was using your family's reputation to appear well-connected and wholesome." I felt guilt and embarrassment settle in my chest like a lead weight. "I know," I said, inhaling and letting it out again slowly. It was one thing to imagine how people saw me, another to hear it straight out. I always worried that if I said anything about him to someone, it would be misconstrued and somehow break his public strategy. Plus, we weren't like you and Bennett. We didn't have a lot of fun together by the time I met you. Andy was a phony and an epic jerk, and it took me a really long time to see that. This thing on Friday was just fun." Chloe looked up. "Hey, it's fine. I knew it was something like that." "A frame?" My heart jumped in my chest. Tucked inside were a wrapped parcel and a note that read, "Petal. Open this with discretion. It is my favorite. Your stranger." I swallowed, feeling a little as if I were on the verge of unleashing something I would no longer be able to contain. Looking up to ensure that my door was firmly shut, I unwrapped it, my hands shaking when I realized that it was indeed a frame. Made of deep, simply cut wood, it held a single photo, a picture of my stomach and the curve of my waist. The black table beneath me was visible. Max's fingertips were also visible at the bottom, as if he was pinning me to the surface at my hips. A faint beam of light spread across my skin. a reminder of the door opening nearby, of the person wandering around the room just beyond the screen. He must have taken that picture just as he buried himself in me. I closed my eyes. Thought to care. Crap, I whispered. I knew with sudden clarity that this thing between us either needed to end absolutely, or I needed some semblance of control. Feeling relieved in hindsight was a slippery slope, and I'd already dodged 3 bullets in my first week. I hit the spacebar on my laptop to wake up my computer and Googled the location of Stella and Sumner. I couldn't help but smile. Of course. 30 Rockefeller Plaza. Stella and Sumner took up half of the 72nd floor of the GE building, one of the most iconic buildings in the city. Even I recognized it from blocks away. However, for such a well-known venture capital firm, I was surprised how little space it required. Then again, it took very little to run a company that basically just raised and invested money. Max, Will, some junior executives, and assorted math brainiacs. My heart was hammering so fast I had to count 10 deep breaths and then give him. I didn't want to be how I was with Andy initially, easily bulldozed. After 6 years, I realized the problem was I'd never really cared enough to fight for anything. He smiled. I figured as much. Do you want to sit? I shook my head. Do you want something to drink? He walked over to a small bar in the corner and held up a crystal bottle filled with amber liquid. Without thinking, I nodded, and he poured 2 glasses. Handing it to me, he whispered, Just 2 fingers today, Petal. I surrendered to my laugh. Thank you. I'm sorry, this whole situation is just eating at me. He raised an eyebrow, but seemed to rethink lacing further innuendo into the moment. Likewise. I feel a little out of my depth with you, I started. He laughed, but not rudely. I can tell. See, before what happened in the club, I'd been with the same guy since I was 21. Max took a sip of, I just don't want things to get crazy or off track. I understand you perfectly. Did he? He couldn't possibly. And in truth, it didn't matter whether he understood that even more important than my life staying on track was my need for it to not be as safe as it had been in Chicago. Safe was a nightmare. Safe was a lie. 1 night a week, I said. I'll be yours 1 night a week. He stared at me with that calm, reflective expression, and I realized that every time I'd seen him before this, he'd been showing every card he had. His smile was complete honesty. His laughter was him being perfectly real. But this expression was his mask. My stomach tightened painfully. If you even want to see me again, that is. I absolutely do, he assured me. I'm just not entirely sure what you're saying. I stood up and walked over to the window. I felt him move behind me and I said, I feel, and took the long elevator ride back to the lobby, thinking about that cell camera of his all the way down. 2 blocks away, my phone buzzed in my purse. Meet me Friday at 11th and Kent in Brooklyn, 6 o'clock. Have a cab bring you and stay in it until I've opened the door. You may come straight from work.
Six. Back when I was young and naive, Dimitri Gerard had been the second client I ever took on. He'd had a small but profitable antiques business in North London. On paper, Dimitri's business was nothing special. He paid his bills on time, had a steady client list, and made more money a year than what he put out on expenditures. But what was truly exceptional about Dimitri was his uncanny ability to sniff out rare finds that few people knew existed. Pieces that, in the right hands, sold for small fortunes to collectors around the globe. He'd needed capital.
I sat back at my desk in my office, closing my eyes as the memory returned from the last time Andy and I had had sex, more than 4 months ago. We'd stopped bothering to argue over his schedule, or mine. Instead, the lack of intimacy in our relationship felt like a dark shadow growing to cover the room. I'd tried to spice things up, showing up at his office late one night in nothing but a long coat and heels. But I'd have been better off showing up wearing a yellow duck suit for how embarrassed he was to see me. "I can't have sex with you here," he'd hissed, looking over my shoulder. Maybe he said that because he could only have sex with other women in the office. I'd been humiliated. Without saying anything, I'd turned and left. Later that night, he came home and made some effort, waking me up, kissing me, trying to take his time and make it good. It hadn't been. My eyes blinked open as the reality of everything seemed to hit me in this one, totally random moment. Max made me feel so good, and that there was at least one other person in the room with us. Anticipation thrummed low in my belly. Max lifted a book from the shelf without even really looking. "Do you read smut, Sarah?" I knew when he laughed a little at my reaction that my eyes must have nearly popped out of my head. I wasn't a prude, and I wasn't closed to the idea of erotica. I'd simply never gone looking for it. Not much. Not much, or not any. I've read some romance novels. He was already shaking his head. "I'm not talking about soft focus covers with sweaty, bare-chested men. I mean books that tell you how the woman feels when the man penetrates her, how she aches when he slips his tongue inside her, how he describes her flavor when she asks him to. I mean books that describe the fucking." My heart began to drill beneath my sternum at how casually he talked about things that made me want to close my eyes and squirm. "Then no, I haven't read anything like that." "Well then," he said, handing me the book. "I'm happy to be here for this momentous occasion." I glanced down at the cover. Anais Nin, Delta of Venus. I knew the name, and, like everyone, I knew the reputation, too. Great, let's check this one out. I flipped it over, looking for some kind of barcode or number, but the volume was leather with heavy gilded pages, obviously a rare edition. Take it with us? "Oh, no. One can't actually check out the books at this library," he began. "And besides, where would the fun be in that anyway? The acoustics in here are so lovely, with the wood and ceilings and whatnot." "What, here?" My heart drooped a little. As much as I loved the idea of reading something racy with Max nearby, I loved the idea of being completely wild with him tonight even more, and "I think that'd be pretty shite," he said, frowning thoughtfully. "If either of us wants to end things, let's have the courtesy to say it, right?" I nodded, surprisingly relieved. I suspected that even though I'd made the deal with myself to keep this about sex, if it ended I would still miss it. Miss him. Not only was Max an amazing lover, he was also fun. But he was a player, and took this just as seriously as I did, which is to say not at all. "Now that that's settled..." He turned me to face the stacks. Reaching around me, he opened the book, flipping to a specific passage, and then moved my hand to hold it open. With him pressed behind me and a shelf in front, I felt completely hidden, like I was buried in this hulking man. Or maybe sheltered. "Read," he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. "Start there." He indicated with his fingertip that I begin at a paragraph partway into a chapter. I didn't know what was happening, who was narrating, but I understood it didn't matter. Wetting my lips, I read, "When he and Louise met, they immediately went off together. Antonio was powerfully fascinated by the whiteness of her skin, the abundance of her breasts, her slender waist. Max's hands ran up beneath my dress, over my hips, across my stomach, up to where he cupped my breasts. Fuck, you're soft." One of his hands smoothed down my side and between my legs, teasing at my wetness. It was work to focus on the plain English in front of me, but I kept reading. Max moved his hands away, clearing my head for only a beat, because behind me I could feel him shifting, could hear the click of his belt as he unlatched it. I barely processed the words as I said them, instead listening to the sounds of him behind me. Could I do this?
Instantly, she should tell him he can only have her once a week, and bam, concentration blown. So here I was wondering, if she asked me to stay over at her place some night, what would I say? You know the answer to that, you twat. You'd say yes. I'd had sex with a few dozen women since moving to the States, but lately I'd had a hard time remembering details. Every memory of sex made me think of being with Sarah. She was sweet and wild. She hid so much of herself, and yet she let me do fucking anything. I had never met a woman I found so paradoxically secretive and open. I met a woman, mate. Will shoved his chopsticks back into the takeout container and slid it across the desk. So you're going to talk about it now? Oi, maybe. You've been seeing her for a while now, haven't you? Few weeks, yeah. Just her? I nodded. Clenched, fists tight at my sides, I realized that Sarah, too, had made me forget to act like a bloody arse about the whole thing and stop worrying about whether she was fucking with my head. Sarah reached into her bag, fished out a tissue, and wiped off her hand while it was still inside her purse, giving me a goofy grin and hiding the evidence from our cabbie. And then she leaned forward and kissed me so sweetly it made me want to throw her down on the car seat and make her come against my tongue just to hear her little hoarse cries. Feeling better? She asked quietly, eyes searching. I learned something else about Sarah in that expression. Her first instinct, and the one she continually battled, was to please me. But then we pulled up a block away from my apartment, and she sat back, smiling pleasantly. Is this where you're getting out? I hesitated, wondering if she'd want to come with me. I suppose,
in a tight hug. You could ruin him. I suspect he'll do that himself eventually. I just wanted out. I smiled against her shoulder. And I had the family attorney evict him. I think the papers liked that one. It was my damn house, remember? It had been good to get it all out. Chloe wasn't a stranger to heartbreak, and the entire time we talked about Andy, I remembered how a little over a year ago, when she'd abruptly left Ryan Media, she'd sequestered herself in her apartment and hadn't been in contact for a week. When she finally called, she told me everything that happened between her and Bennett, how they'd started off their secret fling, and how she'd decided that she needed to leave him. It had been a revelatory moment for me, but in the completely wrong way. Her decision to leave her job and potentially sacrifice her relationship only strengthened my resolve to see things through with Andy. I'd wanted to work hard enough on it for both of us. Dad had about 70 of the machines in storage and another 7 or 8 in the game room at home. In fact, it was during a tour of the game room that Dad and Andy had first bonded. Although Dad had no way of knowing that Andy had never played pinball in his life, Andy had acted like Dad's collection was the most amazing thing he'd ever seen, and managed to sound like he'd been playing since he could reach the levers. Dad had been smitten, and at the time I'd been thrilled. I was only 21 and wasn't sure how my parents would feel about a boyfriend who was almost 10 years older than me. But Dad immediately did everything he could, with his time and his checkbook, to support our relationship and Andy's ambitions. My father was always easy to win over, and once won, his esteem was almost impossible to lose. Unless, of course, he ran into you while you were out at a romantic dinner with a woman who wasn't his daughter. Despite what my father told me, and how much he urged me to see Andy for who he was, and not the public image he strove, slightly wounded. No. My friends know there's someone, but not who. A thick awkwardness settled between us for a beat, and I didn't know what protocol was here. It was exactly why the Friday-only arrangement was ideal. It required no thought, no negotiation of friends, feelings, or boundaries. Do you ever think about how weird it is that we run into each other all the time? He asked, eyes unreadable. No, I admitted. Isn't that the way the world works? In a city of millions, you'll always see the same person. But how often is it the person you most want to see? I blinked away, feeling a bubbling mixture of unease and thrill drill up from my belly. He ignored my awkward silence and pushed on. We're still on for tomorrow, yeah? Why wouldn't we be? He laughed, dropping his gaze to my lips. Because it's a holiday, Petal. I wasn't sure I had holiday privileges. It's not a holiday for you. What to wear? When I got there, it was clear there was really only one building he could mean. It was modern stone and glass and overlooked the Chelsea Waterside Park. It also had a ridiculous view of the Hudson. The lobby was empty but for a security guard behind a desk, and after I fidgeted for about a minute, he asked me if I was Mr. Stella's friend. I paused, wary. Yes. Oh, good. I should have asked sooner. He stood, almost as big around as he was tall, and waved me over to the elevators. I'm supposed to send you up. I stared for a beat before snapping into action and walking into the elevator beside him. The guard stuck a key in the slot and then hit the R key. Roof. We were going to the roof? With a friendly wave, he stepped out. Have a nice 4th, he said, just as the doors closed. There were 27 floors in the building, but the elevator was clearly new and very fast, and I barely had time. I've had one other lover, I admitted. Max's eyes stopped smiling. You've been with one other person. But he fucked everyone else in Chicago while we were together. He let out a quiet curse. Sarah. So, if you consider that I've been with everyone he was with, then I've been with far more than one. I tried to smile to take the sharpness out of my words. Have you been tested since? Yes. I shifted my hips up against his, wanting this more than I realized. Andy had started using condoms halfway through our relationship. That alone should have clued me in somehow. At the time it felt depressingly distancing, although he told me it was to be sure we didn't have kids before we were ready. Now I realized he afforded me at least that one courtesy. But Max was doing it all backward. Distance at first, and then careening headlong into this strange monogamy we had. Crap, Sarah. That's how most people do it. I tugged at his hips, lifted to suck at his neck. Okay, then. Max moved back, reached between us, and slid inside with a low groan. Slowly, slowly, slowly he filled me, and then he covered my body with his, kissed his way up my neck, and pressed his lips against mine. Fucking brilliant, he whispered. Christ, there's nothing like this. A strange desperation took over me. I had never felt his weight on me so fully, felt every bit of his bare skin, and it was a completely different type of possession. His shoulders were so broad, every muscle bunched and defined under my hands. Inside and over me, Max felt like his own planet. He continued to kiss me as he moved, starting so slow, letting me feel every inch. Someone could look over here, see you beneath me, thighs spread. For someone like me, who had, if anything, always felt more rather than less, it was jarring. The eeriest hollow sensation bloomed in my chest. I should probably go, I said, stretching and letting the blanket fall away. Max looked over my naked body before meeting my eyes. Why are you always in such a hurry to leave? We don't do overnights, I reminded him. Not even on holidays. I could use a morning shag. We can use Mum's guest room. So call Will. He's cute. I would, but he always insists on being Big Spoon. It's awkward. He paused. Wait. You think Will is cute? I laughed, taking a final sip of beer and reaching for my clothes. Yes, but you're more my type. Posh. Gifted in the penis department. Godlike. I looked over at him and laughed. I was going to say you have the perfectly warm. For a beat, I regretted not still being with Max. I'd squandered the chance to touch his skin, taste his sounds, and feel his weight over me all night long. But when I walked into my bedroom and studied my reflection in the mirror on my closet door, I looked suddenly unfamiliar to myself. I stood straighter, blinked less, watched more. Even I could see there was some wisdom in my eyes that hadn't been there before.
"10. I still don't understand why you're coming with me today." I bit back a smile as I met Will's annoyed expression in the mirrored doors of the elevator, ignoring the curious glances we'd earned from some of the other passengers around us. He hit the button for the 18th floor. My attention lingered on the label beside it, Ryan Media Group. "You know how much I enjoy seeing you in action, fish in a barrel. What makes you think she's free in the afternoon?" Will began going through his papers, and I took a seat at the long table, letting my mind wander to the last time I'd been in this building. I'd been chasing after her that day, too, though admittedly not that much had changed. Sure, I'd spent time with her, fucked her, and tasted her, and touched practically every inch of her body, but I was no closer to understanding what was going on in that pretty little head now than I was then. The sound of voices carried down the hall, and I looked up just as Bennett walked inside. "Will," he said, reaching out to shake his hand. "Thanks for coming down." He gave me a curious smile. "Max, wasn't expecting to see you today. You joining in on our discussion of B&T Biotech?" It was impossible to miss the smug look of satisfaction on Will's face. Both he and Bennett knew I'd only scraped my way through biochemistry by flirting with the professor, Dr. William Haverston. They loved to reminisce about the boyfriend I almost had. The realization that I wanted Sarah, that I'd always wanted Sarah from the first day I saw her. I also accepted the truth that I'd expected Sarah to eventually hope for more, and that I would be the one setting limits, not her. "Max, I'm kind of a mess," she said quietly. "Will you at least tell me why?" "Not today," she said, looking up at the branches overhead. "I'm happy with what we're doing, but it's not always easy to be kept at such arm's length." She laughed a little, humorlessly. "I know." And then she leaned over and pressed her mouth against mine. I expected a tiny peck, a discreet public kiss to wipe the slate clean after I'd admitted I should have given her a heads up and she admitted she'd overreacted. But it turned into something wholly deeper, her hands on either side of my face, mouth open and hungry for more, and finally her climbing over me, straddling my...
It was my grandmother's recipe from Denmark, and focusing on making them perfect gave me time to think. I hadn't spent much time thinking at all lately, but cooking something so associated with my family also made me miss home, miss my parents, miss the safety of a predictable life, no matter how depressing or untrue. I reached for my phone, not caring how messy my hands were. Mom picked up on the 7th ring, so typical. "Hi, Pumpkin." I heard something crash in the background and she swore. "Fucksticks." "You okay?" I asked, smiling into the call. It was amazing how 3 words could make me feel grounded. "Fine, just dropped my iPad. You okay, honey?" And when she asked this, I remembered I'd called her that morning on my walk to the subway. "Just wanted to hear your voice." She paused. "Feeling homesick?" "A little." "Tell me," she said, and I immediately remembered the hundreds of times it had never been like that. The niggling desire to know each other had started pushing its way in from day one, and I knew that as much as I wanted to be a person who could compartmentalize my relationship into just sex, I never really would be. I remembered the panic on his face when he chased me down, and felt a stab of guilt. "Sarah, you are a complete fail at booty call for beginners." On Wednesday, he texted me a picture from our night at the library. It was of the hem of my dress, pushed up against my lower back. A simple shot, but he'd stylized it into black and white, and the original was blurry enough for me to know he'd taken it toward the end, when I'd dissolved into inarticulate recitation and he'd followed me into orgasm with a groan muffled against my neck. On Thursday, it was a picture I remembered seeing as we flipped through his phone on the 4th of July. It was a photo of my hands unbuttoning his jeans. I'd pulled the denim away from his skin just enough to see the faint shape of his cock straining against his gray boxer briefs. Both pictures were sent around lunchtime, and I received them while I worked on finalizing 2 major contracts. I tried to convince myself that I felt giddy from getting a few contracts done rather than from the prospect of seeing him. I was a giant lying liar. "Question," George said, walking into my office without knocking first. "Are we entirely sure Max Stella is straight? I've been thinking about this since he was here on Monday." I blinked, trying to figure out if I'd just said his name out loud or if George was just doing what Chloe had been doing since the Stella and Sumner meeting, making constant, casual references to their firm and then watching me for any reaction. "Pretty sure." "Maybe he's bi?" I looked up at him and dropped my red pen onto the thick contract in front of me. "Honestly, I really doubt it." George lifted 2 curious eyebrows. "You know personally?" I said, laughing. "That's something, all right." He moved back to his desk and started sorting through a stack of papers. "You can tell me all about your favorite parts over dinner." I started to protest, but he lifted a finger to his lips and hushed me. "Read." I stared at the page as the words swam together. What kind of woman makes a big deal over dinner? The kind of woman, Sarah, I thought, who recognizes that dinner leads to sleeping over, which leads to staying together every night, and that leads to keys and then moving in, and then come excuses and quiet sex, and then no sex and no conversation, and hoping that there is some public engagement that invites us as a couple so that I'll have time with him. Then again, I'd regretted not sleeping over with Max on the 4th, and I was starting to miss him during the week. Damn. I coughed, squeezing my eyes shut. "All right," Max murmured from across the room. "Fine." After another 20 minutes passed, and Andy Sell.
12. I put Sarah in a cab and watched as the taillights disappeared into the darkness. Fuck. She'd ignored the call at dinner, glancing at the screen before silencing it to vibrate against the table, but not before I saw who it was, and definitely not before I saw her try to hide her reaction. Andy Sell. I'd never seen anyone shut down like that before. It was like someone flipped a switch and the light slowly drained from her face. She'd begun picking at her food and stopped talking, withdrawing into herself and answering in single-word sentences for the remainder of the meal. I tried to lighten the mood, told a few jokes and flirted with her shamelessly, but nothing. After about 10 minutes, she'd put us both out of our misery, feigning a headache and insisting that she take a cab home. Alone. Fuck. I continued to stare off into the empty street as my car pulled up to the curb, idling quietly behind me. I waved off my driver, opening the door myself and climbing inside. "Where to, Mr. Stella?" "Let's head home, Scott," I said, slumping back into the seat. We pulled away, and I watched the city rush by in a blur, my mood darkening with each block we passed. Things had been going so well. She'd finally started to open up, to let me into that vault of a mind of hers. I was still reeling from her admission that her parents owned one of the largest luxury department store chains in the country. And then, Andy Sell. Fucking Andy Sell. Anger flared in my chest, and for a brief moment I wondered how often they spoke. 6 years was a long time and meant they had a history that would be hard to simply brush under the rug. I don't know why I'd assumed he was completely out of her life. It made sense that she didn't want to be in another relationship, but her forced distance always felt so much larger secret that Andy had cheated on Sarah several times in the past year, and a growing perception was that he was using her for her family's name and their money, exploiting the press's love for their local celebrity romance whenever his reputation was in need of a little public relations boost. I glanced through a few more photos before I pushed back from my desk, disgusted. That arsehole had used her. He'd asked her to marry him and then proceeded to fuck everything in a skirt. Christ, no wonder she had issues, and no wonder, too, that she was so mistrustful of paparazzi. My flat had grown dark by the time I powered off the computer and left the den. I made my way to the wet bar, switching on a few lamps as I went, and poured myself a scotch. The drink burned on its way down, immediately spreading warmth throughout my veins. It didn't help, but I finished it anyway. I poured myself another drink and wondered what she was doing. Was she home? Had she called the cheating bastard back? After looking at those hundreds of pictures tonight, and I'll defile you next time. I wanted to ask her to stay, but I wasn't sure I could handle it if she said no tonight. Are you okay? She nodded, pressing her face to my chest. I think I just need some sleep. I'll have Scott drive you home. We dressed in silence, openly watching each other. It was a bit of a reverse seduction seeing her pull her jeans on, fasten her bra, cover her breasts with her sweater. But I didn't think I'd ever wanted her more than in that moment when I was witnessing her put herself back together. I was falling in love with her, and I was royally fucked. Saturday morning, I'd started to dial Sarah at least 20 times before hanging up just before it would ring. My head told me to give her some distance. But fuck, I wanted to see her. I was acting like a fucking teenager. Call her, you git. Ask her to come out today. Don't take no for an answer. I stool and broke out into a grin at the sight of her. She looked like a cake topper, in a pale yellow dress and a tiny green pin in her hair. You look beautiful. Her eyes closed for a beat, and I murmured, sorry we're late. She weaved a little where she stood, saying, gave me time to have a few drinks. I hadn't seen her drunk since the night of the club, but I recognized a familiar light in her eyes. Mischief. The thought of that Sarah reappearing was fucking fantastic. You're pissed? Her brows pinched together for a brief pulse, and then smoothed as she smiled. British for drunk? Yeah, I'm tipsy. She stood on her toes then, and kissed me. Holy fuck. Beside me, Richie chimed in. What the? Max, there's a girl on your face. Sarah pulled back and her eyes widened in realization. Oh crap. And like this, tipsy Sarah worked her way down the bar, introducing herself to every single one of my mates. In her, I saw the politician's wife she'd almost been. But even more than that, I saw that Sarah was just a really fucking sweet girl. When she returned to me, she kissed my cheek and whispered, your friends are nice. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, sure. I lost my ability to form coherent thoughts. Almost nothing in my life made me feel the way she was making me feel. So bloody good. I wasn't full of self-loathing, but I'd been a bit of a slut, worked in investments that, let's be honest, relied on people losing money as much as others making it, and I'd fostered few deep connections since I'd been stateside. My closest friend was Will, and most of the time we just called each other names that were all variations on the word pussy. Tell her you dig. Pull her to the other side of the room, give her a good snog, and tell her you love her.
AKA fries. Perfect. Thanks. I set my purse on an empty chair and sat across from him. His eyes smiled, and then dipped to look at my lips. So, I said, sipping my beer and assessing him over the rim. So. He looked positively amused with this turn of events. I wasn't a control freak, but I was used to having a pretty predictable life, and in the past 2 months I hadn't been able to anticipate anything that had come my way. Thanks for inviting me to the bar today. He nodded, scratching the back of his neck. Thanks for coming. Your friends are nice. They're a bunch of assholes. I laughed, feeling my shoulders slowly relax. That's funny. That's what they said about you. He rested his elbows on the table and leaned forward. I have a question. Yes? Are we on a date? I nearly choked on the sip of beer I'd just taken. For the love of God, woman, don't have a fit. I just want I'm wounded. It's not your business, I said, practically ripping the paper from his hands and looking it over. It was obviously Max in the photo, but with only the back of my head and part of my arm and hand visible, my identity would be almost impossible to discern by anyone who didn't already know me. It's your allergy bracelet and your adorable hair, George crowed. How long? Not your business. Is he amazing in bed? He is, isn't he? Oh, God, don't tell me yet. Let me work up a good mental lather first. He squeezed his eyes shut and hummed. Not your business, I repeated, a hand to my forehead. Holy hell, Bennett and Chloe were going to see this. My co-workers. Someone could send this to my parents. Oh, God. Are you guys like a thing? He asked, exasperated and slapping his hand to my desk. Oh, my God, not your business. Get out of my office, Skippy. He stood, then gave me a dirty look that was about as genuine as a politician's smile. He looked more excited. Chloe and George disappeared down the hall, and Max shut and locked my office door. Are you livid? He asked, wincing. What? No, I sighed, dropping into my chair. If I remember correctly, I jumped you. I believe you even warned me not to. True, he said, flashing his dimple in a smile as he lifted the photo up. But I also come out of this looking quite good. I mean, the back of this head can only belong to a ridiculously fit woman. I tried to bite back my laugh and failed. He bent so that we were eye to eye. We're together a lot, Sarah. It's just a matter of time before we're photographed. I nodded. I know. He straightened, looking out my window with a dramatic sigh. I suppose we'll have to confine our snogs to bedrooms and limos now. He said this with a smirk, but something twisted in my belly, and not because I was averse to the idea of Max in a bed. It's just that I wasn't done having Max everywhere else.
Absolute confidentiality. On the main floor, Johnny has some truly stunning dancers who are intimate in beautifully complicated, choreographed ways. The rest of the club has rooms where, through windows or mirrors, you can watch one thing or another. I cleared my throat and met her eyes. Johnny has offered to let us play in a room tonight, if you want. To all outward appearances, it was a basic rundown building, housing assorted businesses, including an Italian restaurant, a hair salon, and a boarded-up Asian market. The only other time I'd visited, Johnny took me in through a back entrance. The door he told me to use tonight was apparently the main entrance, an unassuming battered steel door off the alley, and required the key he'd had messengered over to my office that afternoon. How many people have a key? I'd asked him on the phone. 4, he told me. You're 5. It's how we keep track of who comes in. Random Joes can't get there. We have a list for each night. 2. Variety. If I remember correctly, the scenarios in the rooms tend to be wilder, and they're smaller, more intimate. She nodded, lifting her drink and taking a sip, studying me. No one here knows who I am, still I'm the one wearing a wig and a mask. Smiling, I pointed out, historically, you have been the one who wants to remain hidden. You would do this for me? Let people watch us together? I suspect I would do almost anything for you, I admitted. And then, unable to see in the dark corner how my words affected her, I added, the thought is probably just as much a rush for me as it seems to be for you. She slid her hand onto my thigh under the table. But people here know you. They know your face. There are people all over this room who are far more famous. That man in the corner is an American football player for some team Will is always going on about. And that woman? I motioned subtly to a table near the bar. Television. Ignore it. She blinked away, but leaned into my side, and we started walking again. Room 4 had 3 women, kissing and laughing as they undressed each other on a gigantic white bed. Room 5 had a man binding a woman up with rope, while a bound and gagged cuckolded man watched from the corner. "We're going to be boring," she whispered, eyes wide. "You really think so?" She didn't answer because we'd arrived at room 6, which stood empty. Without even looking to me, she slipped around the end of the hall to where we could enter the rooms from the rear. The door handle to 6 turned easily, and Sarah stepped inside. After a few moments, our eyes adjusted, and I could make out a bar in the corner and a huge leather couch with a low coffee table in front. Even in the darkness, the room felt very much like a corner of my own living room, and I suspected with a jolt that it was a replica of that space. Without thinking to ask Sarah, "Me too. I'd love him to see how you look when you're coming, since I bet he didn't really manage to see that much." She laughed, licking up my throat. "No." And fuck, for the first time in my life, I wanted to be someone's only. I led her to the couch, then kneeled on the floor between her legs. Her hands laced into my hair. "What do you want me to do?" she whispered, looking down at me, always so willing to give me anything. What do I want? I struggled to find the right answer, suddenly more than a little overwhelmed with the enormity of that question. You over me, you under me, your laugh in my ears, your voice in my chest, your wet on my fingers, your taste on my tongue. I think I want to know you feel the way I do. "I just want you to enjoy this tonight." I leaned forward, pressing my mouth between her legs. She smelled dizzying, tasted too good, looked too beautiful.
Me at the club, I was beginning to realize I'd walk across flaming coals for the man. I'd been nervous, no doubt. The club felt darkly indulgent and was supported by patrons who'd been thinking about this kind of sexual fantasy maybe longer than I'd been alive. I wasn't sure if there were unspoken rules I was meant to follow. Don't speak too loudly. Don't cross your legs. Don't look anyone in the eye. Don't drink your cocktail too fast. My parents were so wholly innocent next to this world. Their idea of a wild night out was seeing the vagina monologues and dinner at some trendy Asian fusion restaurant. To this day, my father considered sushi just a little too adventurous for him. And here I was, walking into a secret sex club, and on my first night there, letting Max go down on me where anyone present could watch. I had no idea, in the end, if anyone had in fact been watching. We left through the back door to the room, where Max's friend Johnny met us and let us leave through a service entrance. Talking about the size of my apartment, I wanted to know what was in the bag. He only ever carried his wallet, phone, and a house key. I don't need more right now. His eyes moved to mine, and he nodded once, lips tilting in a half-smile. "You're a complicated woman, Sarah Dillon." Sometimes, after I went for a long run, I was so high afterward that I couldn't do anything but go back out and run some more. I would have so much energy in my blood I couldn't stand to be still. I felt like that now. "Max, I held up my hand to show him how much it was shaking. "I don't know what to do right now." "Undress for me." He dug into his bag and pulled out a huge, fancy camera. "I want pictures of everything tonight," he said, gazing at me through the lens. The sound of the shutter set my heart racing inside my chest. I felt dizzy, lightheaded. "Including our faces?" I said quietly. "Yeah," he said. I wanted to only feel him. "You're beautiful," he whispered, when I'd given up and cried out, when I'd finally stilled and he'd crawled over me, kissing me deeply. "It's staggering how it affects me." I reached up and dragged my nails down his chest, urging him to use my body to get what he needed this time, to feel everything he possibly could. My hands moved on their own accord, roaming and scratching, pulling him closer and pushing him back, so I could see him when he reached between us to position himself against me. I tickled down his stomach, feeling his muscles clench underneath my fingertips. I whispered, "Please." He groaned, exhaling as he lowered his body over mine and pushed into me fully. The sensation was astounding, everything all at once. The feeling of his chest on mine, of his face against my neck, of my arms around his neck and hands diving into his hair, of his hands pulling my thighs around. I always wanted an answer as soon as he'd asked the question. The truth is, my mind had never worked that way. Politicians pop questions and answers like verbal racquetball. It always took me longer to formulate what I wanted to say. And, in the case of Max, it seemed that it took me a couple of months to sort out what I felt. I mean, the reason why I felt weird about pictures for so long was that there are so many of me and Andy together, and they'll always be there, easy to pull up every time anyone wants to. I'll always feel humiliated when I see my ignorant smile and his fake lying one. He finished, chewing his bite before answering. No. So I think you're right. Maybe no press this time. Maybe we can just be around some of your guests and see how it goes. Max leaned forward and kissed my shoulder. Works for me. He fed me another grape, and then slid the plate next to a bottle of water on the bedside table before pulling his t-shirt up and over my head. Our love-making was unhurried this time. When the night was at its blackest and the wind roared just outside the open windows, with my legs around his waist and his face buried against my neck, we rocked together, him underneath, just feeling and watching. Nothing had ever been like this. Nothing. Max was curled up behind me when the sun barely began to light the sky. He looked amazing, rumpled hair, and the warmth of his arms and legs wrapped all around me. He was hard and pressing against me, hungry and honest and asking for friction even before his mind was awake. He didn't say a single word once he realized I was watching him. He just rubbed his face, looked at my lips, and reached for the bottle of water we'd left on the nightstand. He offered it to me and then took some, before putting it aside so he could run his hands up and over my breasts.
And only a few minutes here and there on the plane, and was really starting to feel it. I yawned and gathered my bag from the overhead compartment, stepping off the plane and heading out of the terminal and straight for the closest cup of coffee I could find. It had been reckless to blow off my flight just to get an extra hour with Sarah. I knew that, even as I was looking down at her, watching myself move in her. But I'd never felt anything even close to this before, and it was still a bit hard to wrap my head around everything we'd said. A text from Will popped up as I waited for my caffeine. Any new sexy pictures, you wild trendsetter? Fuck off. You'd never have the balls to pull out a camera, I wrote back, then stuffed my phone in my bag. I'd call Will later about the meeting and update him on the Sarah situation. With a smile on my face and my drink finally in hand, I stepped away from the counter and took off the lid to add cream. I felt a tap on my shoulder and turned around. I think you dropped this. A shorter man with thinning blonde hair.
The other one was taken earlier this summer, so he's been with her since then. She didn't respond. I stared at the wall, considered putting my fist through it, and then almost laughed at the image. Max could put a fist through a wall. I wouldn't even leave a mark, and would probably end up with a broken hand. I'm tired of feeling like an idiot. So don't be. Kick his ass. This is exactly why I didn't want to get involved with anyone, because I want to see the best in someone, and am totally shattered when I'm wrong. Chloe still didn't say anything, just watched me from across the room. Max didn't even have a phone or a laptop. I couldn't call to find out anything. I wasn't sure I wanted to. I picked up my phone and powered it off. What do we have on the calendar today? I hit the spacebar on my computer to wake up the screen and glanced through my appointments. I looked up at my friend. She reached over and turned off my monitor. Nothing pressing. Ouch, I moaned, rubbing over my heart. Last time I was so far beyond feeling sad, I was just mad. This just hurts. Chloe threw an arm around me. Men suck. Her phone rang and she answered it after barely one ring. I'm at a bar. She paused, listening, then said, Yeah, we're getting day drunk. She's sad, and I want to castrate him. I know. I will. I promise. I won't throw up all over the new carpet. Settle down. I'll see you later. She ended the call and gave the phone the finger. Such a bossy ass. And then she slumped against me. You deserve a guy like Bennett. George bent down, inspecting us and shaking his head. You two are a mess. Tomorrow night we're doing Buck Up Sarah time the gay way. Tuesday night, George took us to a gay bar, packed wall to wall with people, pounding with music. When I'd hit rock bottom, you came into my office and yelled at me. Oh, shit. You gave me perspective, hinted that my feelings for Chloe weren't a surprise to anyone. You made it clear that everyone knew I was hard on her because I held her in particularly high regard. I smiled when I realized he wasn't going to chew me out. I remember. You were both such sad sacks. I'm here to return the favor. I've known Max a long time. He sat down in the chair on the other side of my desk. He's always been a bit of a playboy. He's never been in love, I don't think. Before you, he added, eyebrow raised. I knew it wouldn't matter how long I knew Bennett. I would always feel intimidated by him, especially when he pulled the eyebrow move. And he hasn't told me what's going on, even though I've broken my own unspoken rules and actually asked. But he did say he hasn't heard from you. And from what I hear from Will, he's not doing well. If you really felt strongly about him, kissing her neck, that's why you love me. I loved seeing them happy, and wasn't cynical enough to think that person didn't exist for me. I just realized, as I stared down at my dress, that I'd spent more than an hour getting ready for this. I had really wanted my person to be Max. I turned and looked out the window, trying not to remember the last time I'd been to his building and how safe I'd felt with him in the shower. But to my tangled horror and relief, when we arrived, the security guard remembered me and smiled. Good evening, Miss Dillon. He escorted us to the elevator and pressed the button for the penthouse before stepping back to leave us to ourselves. Enjoy your night. I thanked him as the doors closed, and I felt like I might fall over. I'm legitimately worried I'm going to have a stroke, I hissed. Remind me why I'm here. Breathe, Chloe whispered to me. Bennett leaned forward to look at me. You're here to show him how beautiful you look, and that he didn't break you. If that's the only thing that happens tonight. I didn't know what he felt, what was real and what wasn't. I didn't know what we had really been. Sarah. I turned at the sound of Will's uniquely deep voice. Hi, Will. I hated seeing him so serious. I'd rarely seen either Max or Will unsmiling. This looked all wrong. He studied me for a beat and then murmured, Does he know you're here? I looked across the room at where Max stood, speaking to two older women. I don't know. Should I tell him? I shook my head and he sighed. He's been such a useless bastard. I'm really glad you came. Laughing a little, I admitted, I'm still undecided. I'm really sorry, he said quietly. I met his eyes. You don't have to apologize for Max's indiscretions. His brow furrowed, and he shook his head once. He never told you? My heart fell, and then immediately began thundering. Told me what? But Will took a step back. I jumped, pressing my hand to my chest at the sound of his voice. Closing my eyes, I asked, Not even me? Especially not you. I turned around to look at him, but it was a mistake. I should have taken a bigger breath, prepared myself somehow for how he would look up close. Crisp, put together, unbelievably gorgeous. But at the edges, broken. Dark lines circled his unsmiling eyes. His lips were tight and pale. I was having a hard time out there, I admitted. The room, the couch. He looked up at me, eyes hard. It was like that for me when I came home from San Francisco, you know. I wanted to buy all new furniture. We drowned in a heavy silence after that until he finally looked away. I didn't know where to start. I had to remember that his phone had pictures of other women on it, ones more recent than those of me. But here in this room, He seemed more hurt than I did. Hate. You've made that clear. But why do you assume I've done something wrong? Have I ever lied to you or kept anything from you? I trusted you. You assume I've never been hurt and that trust comes easily to me. You're too busy guarding your own heart to realize that maybe I'm not the asshole people expect me to be. Any response dissipated when he'd said this. He was right. After he'd told me about Cecily and his romantic life after, I'd assumed it had been easy for him, and that he had no experience with the harsher side of love. You could have let me explain, he said. I'm here. Explain now. His scowl deepened, but he blinked away, nodding. Whoever stole my bag sold the pictures as their own. The good folks at Celebritini found 198 pictures of you in my briefcase, on my SD card, my phone, and a thumb drive. Had they been able to decode the password on my laptop, they would have found another couple hundred. And yet, it always seemed so easy for you. It was easy. Falling absolutely in love with you was really fucking easy. Isn't it supposed to be that way? Just because I haven't been broken-hearted in recent years doesn't mean I'm incapable of it. Fuck, Sarah. I've been wrecked for the past 2 weeks. Positively smashed. I pressed a hand to my stomach, feeling like I needed to physically hold myself together. Me too. He sighed, stared down at his shoes, and didn't say anything else. In my chest, my heart twisted tightly. I want to be with you, I said. He nodded once, but didn't look back up, didn't even say a word. I stepped closer, stretched to kiss his cheek, and only made it to his jaw because he wouldn't bend to meet me. Max, I miss you, I told him. I know, I jumped to conclusions. I thought... I stopped, hating how still he remained. Without looking back, I walked out of his dressing room, through his bedroom, and back to the party. I want to go home, I said to Chloe, once I'd been able to discreetly, semi-discreetly, pull her away from a conversation with Bennett and Will. The two men watched us in the obvious way men have where they don't even bother trying to hide what they're doing. We all stood in the recessed portion of the living room that looked exactly like the room in the club. The memories sent sharp pangs through my chest. I wanted to get out of this dress, wash my face, and curl up in a tub of cookie dough. Give us 20? She asked, eyes searching mine. Or do you need to leave right this second? I groaned, looking around the room. Max still hadn't emerged from his bedroom, and I wanted to be gone when he did. I certainly didn't want to be standing exactly where I was, remembering exactly how loving he'd been with me in Johnny's club, and every second after. I was mortified and confused, and most of all, I was wildly